Greetings, my friends. Whether you're seeing me at church or from your home, it's good to be with you again. I'm speaking to you from home, and again, I have to thank those people who make this technological marvel possible. I'm keeping you all in my prayers, praying that however you're travelling at the moment, that you are aware of God's goodness with you. And I'm sure you are joining me in praying for all those people who are keeping us safe at the moment. So let's begin. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. For many years of Bible study, I know that when asked, many people say that Peter, Simon Peter, is their favourite disciple. And I suspect that's probably because he's a bit like us. Perhaps he's a lot like us, but we won't worry too much about that. Peter featured in last week's Gospel and in this week's Gospel, and so I thought I would say a little bit about him. Now, he's the one, of course, who started out as Simon and became known as Peter. So I'll try to get the right name in the right place, but I can't guarantee that I'll be able to do that. Last week, we saw Simon on an emotional high. Jesus says to him, "Simon, who do you say that I am?" And Simon, who's had a lot of trouble getting anything right, seems at this moment to have a breakthrough. He's sufficiently available to God's Spirit that he's able to put everything that he's seen and heard together and to make an amazing statement. He says to Jesus, "You are the Messiah, you are the Son of the living God." Jesus has been waiting for this type of answer for a while, and his response is somewhat extravagant. He says to Simon, "I'm going to give you a new name in honour of this occasion." We know that this is a time-honoured biblical tradition. And so Jesus says, "I'm going to call you Peter." Peter means rock, and a faith statement like you've just made is the rock on which I will build my future communities. When we meet Peter in today's Gospel, he's fallen from this high and he's in, I suspect, the well of despair. So we need to wonder what happened between these two things. The two events are quite close together. What happened? Well, Jesus began to talk about what would happen in Jerusalem. You remember that's where they're heading. And when Peter hears Jesus describing what Jesus expects to happen, he's horrified. And he tries to stop Jesus saying these things. So he goes from being the foundational rock to being a stumbling block. Jesus says to him, "You are a hindrance to me, Peter. Get behind me. I don't want to see you anymore." I think for Peter, this is not a failure of faith. It isn't that what he had just said had stopped being true. It is, I think, though, a failure of imagination for Peter. And imagination is really what I wanted to talk to you about today. If when Peter had said, "You are the Messiah," Jesus had said to him, "And yeah, well, what do you imagine that's like?" I'm sure that Peter would have answered Jesus in the way that 99% of all the people living in the occupied lands would have answered. Peter would have said that he imagined the Messiah to be a great warrior king. He would come riding at the head of a vast army, an army well equipped and well trained. That army would overthrow the Romans, drive them out, and as was the custom in those days, take some into slavery and execute the others. So when Peter hears Jesus talking about the possibility of dying in Jerusalem, well, that's unthinkable to Peter. They haven't even begun. And now Jesus is talking about an end. Peter cannot imagine what it is that Jesus is striving for. He has no way of joining his imagination to Jesus at this stage. Jesus imagines things very differently. He's seen around him the cycle of power, struggle, oppression, and violence. And he sees that this cycle just goes on and on and on. And we know that. We can see that cycle in our world today. People accrue power, they impose it on others, they exploit those people to keep themselves in power, and if that doesn't work, they use violence. So the ordinary people are not given freedom. Nothing changes for them except the name of the person at the top. And Jesus wants this whole cycle to stop. He imagines communities and a world in which this cycle is not just rolling around and around and around. That's why he will go to Jerusalem. He will walk into the middle of his enemies. He'll put his case, but he will not use violence, and he won't allow his followers to use violence either. And throughout this whole ordeal, which will end in his death, he will demonstrate or show the three principles that he imagines his communities will have. There will be agape love. Agape love means that you want for the other person the same thing as you want for yourself. So it might be that you have to give up something that you have in order that someone else can have what they need. So the first governing principle is agape love, where I want for others what I want for myself. The second principle is forgiveness. Forgiveness means that I give up any idea of revenge or retribution. I free the other person from that. I forgive them. It's not a warm, fuzzy feeling. We may feel warm and fuzzy, but it's a deliberate act of will that I choose not to seek revenge, I choose to forgive and to set the other person free. I don't know if you heard, as I did, a news item, it was only a tiny little bit of a news item, about a woman whose family were caught up in the shooting in the mosque in New Zealand, and she had sent a message to the court hearing to say that she had forgiven the perpetrator of those shootings. So that's the kind of thing that Jesus imagines. The third principle, I think, is a principle of mercy. Not to judge harshly, not to criticize, but to be kind to others that we meet. And so these are the things that Jesus demonstrates in Jerusalem. These are the governing principles that he imagines will govern the communities that will grow up in his name. Agape love, forgiveness, and mercy. And as I said, at this stage, Peter, and I think all the other disciples are probably pretty much in the same boat, they don't understand what Jesus is imagining. They can't join him in this great work of imagination. I think imagining is a gospel work, and we are all called to that work. We are called to imagine the kingdom, if you like, that Jesus wants to see come on earth. And we are called to practice those three principles. Most of us don't get the opportunity to work on a broad scale. Most of us work in a small area of influence. But it is important that in that area of influence, we show agape love, forgiveness, and mercy. And every time we do that, we join our imaginations to Jesus' imagination, to the Christ imagination, and we do our bit to bring it closer to reality. One of the reasons I wanted to talk about the work of imagining today is that I believe that right now, imagining is something that our country needs very much. It's likely the whole world needs it, but I just wanted to talk about our country. We at the moment, I think, can hear two sets of voices. There's a set of voices that wants to return to how things were before. They often say things like, I want to get back to normal. Let's get back to life as it was. And then we'll all feel better and we can go on from there. But there's another group of people who are saying, hang on, let's think about this. Let's not go back to normal. Let's not return to how it was. Let's think about how we can do things in a different way. This pandemic has not caused us the problems that we have, or I don't believe it has. The problems and difficulties in our society have been there for a long time, and some people knew that. But what's happened with this pandemic is that I think many, many more people are now aware, and many more people are wanting something new and different to come out of this. And if as a people we are going to be able to do that, we will need to put our imaginations to work. We're going into territory that we've not been in before. We need to be able to imagine how we might create communities in which there is greater equality. Because I think the inequality is what the pandemic has shown us. It's shown us very clearly that our nursing home system is not right. There is something wrong. And we don't need to tinker at the edges. We need, as I say, to be able to imagine a whole new way of doing things. We know that many of our people, far too many of our people, are in insecure work with no safety net. And work, they may work 7 days a week, but it still does not remunerate them in a way that enables them to live decently. We know that many people have insecure housing. And we've started to realise for the first time which people are really important in our society. And they certainly include all of our frontline health workers and the people who run our pharmacies and our supermarkets and grow our food. But many of these people are the least respected and least well paid in our communities. And surely we can do something about that if we put our imaginations to work. I believe that imagining is a Christian responsibility. And I would like to see Christian people involved in these conversations, whether that's as individual Christians or whether it's as part of a larger group or a church group. This is a conversation that we are well equipped to enter, and we should not be afraid. And I think we will find an astonishing range of people from all walks of life who, for all sorts of reasons, are speaking the same sorts of words as we are speaking. So I'm encouraging you today to use your imagination to think about the world that Jesus imagined, to join yourself to the Christ imagination, and to think about how we might do something to move us towards a world in which everyone has what they need and no one has too much. So my prayer today is that God would sanctify our imaginations so that we might be able to be a part of the national conversation about the society that we can create together. Amen.